In 2015, a story broke that sounded more like a spy thriller than a business dispute. Dmitry Rybolovlev, a Russian fertilizer oligarch, accused his art dealer, a suave Swiss businessman named Yves Bouvier, of systematically defrauding him of over $1 billion. The scheme, he alleged, was deceptively simple. Bouvier would buy a masterpiece for one price, say $80 million, and then turn around and sell it to Rybolovlev for $120 million, pocketing the difference while claiming he was only a broker taking a small commission. This wasn't just a bad deal, it was a declaration of war in a world few of us ever see. The battleground was the modern art market, a place where paintings by Rothko and Da Vinci are traded like poker chips, where prices seem completely disconnected from reality, and where secrecy is the most valuable commodity of all. Because of this case, the world got a rare glimpse into a global shadow economy, one that operates beyond borders, beyond regulation, and often beyond belief. But how did we get here? How did the market for cultural artifacts, objects of beauty and history, become the world's largest, most opaque, and functionally unregulated financial system? A system where a single canvas can be worth more than the GDP of a small nation, and where its price can be set in a private room by just two people. This isn't an accident of history. It's the result of a calculated design. This is the story of how a single sentence, buried in a dusty American tax law from over a century ago, inadvertently built the modern art market. The culprit is the Revenue Act of 1917, a law passed for the noblest of reasons. It created a tax deduction for charitable donations, valued at their fair market value. This seemingly innocent rule transformed art from a cultural good into a speculative financial instrument, an asset whose subjective value could be legally manipulated for enormous tax advantages. Because of that one law, a chain reaction was set in motion. To understand the billion-dollar ghost haunting today's art world, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to a time of war, and to a well-intentioned senator who, in trying to save America's charities, created a loophole that would one day be large enough to hide a fortune. The year is 1917. America is plunging into the Great War. To fund it, Congress had just passed the first truly modern income tax, with a top rate soaring to an unthinkable 67%. The nation's wealthiest citizens were about to see their fortunes shrink dramatically. And one man saw a looming catastrophe. That man was Senator Henry F. Hollis, a Democrat from New Hampshire. Hollis wasn't an art collector. He was a pragmatist. His fear was simple and profound. With the government taxing away so much of their wealth, who would be left to fund the nation's charities? Who would support the Red Cross, the universities, the hospitals, the very pillars of American civil society, just when a world war made them more critical than ever? Because of this fear, Hollis proposed a strategically brilliant amendment to the Revenue Act. The idea was a simple trade. He argued that if a wealthy individual donated to a qualified charity, the government should allow them to deduct that amount from their taxable income. It was a calculated incentive. It redirected private money toward public good, effectively outsourcing social support at a moment of national crisis. The logic was effective, and Congress agreed. But here is where our story truly begins. Buried in the legislative text was a small, almost unnoticeable detail. The deduction wasn't just for cash. It also applied to donations of property stocks, real estate, and, crucially, works of art. These assets were to be deducted at their fair market value. In 1917, this seemed like a minor provision of common sense. What they didn't know was that they had just planted a seed. They had created a legal fiction, a subjective, malleable number, and given it the full power of tax law. This was the noble lie that would give birth to a monster. The noble lie was now law. But a law is only as powerful as its interpretation. The phrase, fair market value, was about to be defined, not by congressmen, but by quiet bureaucrats inside the Treasury Department, and their decision would create the engine of the modern art market. Here's the problem they faced. How do you value a one-of-a-kind object? A share of U.S. steel has a public price, updated every second. But a Rembrandt? Its value is a matter of opinion. Because of this ambiguity, the Treasury had to make a choice. They could have ruled that the deduction was limited to what the donor originally paid for the asset, the cost basis. This would have been simple, clean, and prevented any games. They did the opposite. The ruling was strategically consequential. The Treasury decided that the deductible amount was the fair market value on the day of the donation. Think about what this meant. It meant a collector could buy a painting for $10,000. He could hold it for 20 years as it quietly appreciates in value. Then, an appraiser, hired by him, could declare it's now worth $1 million. If he donates that painting, he gets to deduct the full $1 million from his income. He never paid a single cent of capital gains tax on the $990,000 of growth. But he gets the full tax benefit of it. Go him. This is the golden loophole. It's a kind of financial alchemy. You transform an asset's untaxed, on-paper growth into a real-world cash saving from the government. This single ruling created a powerful, irresistible incentive. It wasn't just about encouraging charity anymore. It was now about a calculated return on investment. The higher you could get your art appraised, the more money you saved on your taxes. This decision lit a fuse. It turned the art object into a financial vehicle, and the art appraiser into a kingmaker. And it created a system that begged to be exploited. And who was in charge of the department that wrote and enforced these new rules? The Secretary of the Treasury himself. A man who happened to be one of the most powerful industrialists and voracious art collectors on the planet, Andrew Mellon. Andrew Mellon was a man who understood systems of power. He'd built a fortune in banking, oil, and aluminum by seeing the connections others missed. Now, as Treasury Secretary under 3 presidents, he sat at the absolute center of American finance. He wasn't just watching the rules of this new tax game being written, he was the referee. And he was also the star player. Mellon faced a strategic challenge common to the ultra-wealthy of his era. He had amassed one of history's great art collections, buying masterpieces from the struggling aristocrats of Europe. But he also knew the new federal estate tax, a levy on great fortunes at death, was a dagger aimed at the heart of his legacy. That tax, with a top rate of 70%, could force his heirs to break up and sell the very collection he'd spent a lifetime building. He needed a way to protect it. His solution was a move of calculated brilliance, one that would serve as the blueprint for generations of wealthy collectors. He would donate his entire collection to the American people. He would personally fund the construction of a monumental museum on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. to house it. It would be a gift of unparalleled generosity. This is why today we have the National Gallery of Art. But Mellon's strategy was twofold. First, the public gesture was undeniable. It secured his name in history, transforming him from a ruthless industrialist into a national benefactor. His legacy was protected. But the second part of the strategy was financial. By donating the art, he legally moved it outside of his estate. Instantly, it was shielded from the devastating estate tax. His heirs wouldn't have to pay a dime on it. Furthermore, the donation of the art, valued at a staggering sum, generated an enormous income tax deduction for Mellon himself. He effectively used a tax shelter of his own department's creation to fund a monument to himself. What Mellon did was prove the concept. He demonstrated on a scale never seen before that art was no longer just a cultural treasure. It was a sophisticated tool for preserving dynastic wealth. He was the architect of the modern system, where a public gift can also be an act of private financial engineering. Because of Mellon, when we see a billionaire's name on a museum wing, we are seeing more than just philanthropy. We are seeing a financial strategy made of marble and bronze. Because of Mellon, when we see a billionaire's name on a museum wing, we are seeing more than just philanthropy. We are seeing a financial strategy made of marble and bronze. This blueprint was not lost on the rest of America's wealthy elite. Mellon's calculated act of public generosity had proven a critical concept. Art was now a tool with a dual purpose. It could hang on a wall for aesthetic pleasure, but it could also perform powerful work on a tax return. This realization fundamentally changed the market. This is why art evolved from a cultural good into a formal asset class. Think of an asset class as a category in an investment portfolio. You have stocks, bonds, real estate, and now, a Monet. The conversation in the backrooms of power began to shift. The question was no longer simply, is this piece beautiful? The new, more important questions were, what is its appraised value? What is its potential for appreciation? And how can it be leveraged to offset a tax liability? This created a new kind of art world. It was a world run not just by gallery owners and connoisseurs, but by wealth managers, tax attorneys, and estate planners. They saw a painting not for its brushstrokes, but for its utility. The artwork itself became almost secondary to its certificate of authenticity and its appraisal value. The very definition of art's purpose was being rewritten from an object of cultural significance into an entry on a balance sheet, a beautiful, highly liquid, and tax-advantaged financial instrument. Once art became a global asset, it needed a global, unregulated bank. But you can't deposit a Picasso in a Swiss bank account. You need a physical vault, one that operates under the same principles of secrecy and tax neutrality. This logistical problem, how to move and store billions in physical assets without triggering taxes or oversight, created the perfect market opportunity. This is where operators like the Swiss businessman Yves Bouvier stepped in. Bouvier didn't invent the concept of a freeport, but he perfected its use for the art market. A freeport is a simple but consequential idea. A secure warehouse inside a country, but legally outside its customs territory. Think of it as a permanent duty-free zone. As long as an object stays inside, no import taxes, VAT, or capital gains taxes are due. It exists in a state of legal limbo. Bouvier's strategy was to transform these zones into luxury vaults for the super-rich. His company built and managed facilities in Geneva, Singapore, and Luxembourg. Climate-controlled fortresses where priceless masterpieces could be stored for years. But they weren't just for storage. Inside these walls, a painting could be bought and sold multiple times between anonymous owners, with the artwork itself never moving from its shelf. No customs agents, no tax authorities, no public records. This system is the ultimate evolution of the loophole's logic. The 1917 law first turned art into a tool for tax reduction. Bouvier's freeports took the next step. They created a world where art could exist almost entirely outside of any tax jurisdiction whatsoever. He built the physical infrastructure for the secrecy and financial maneuvering that the modern art market now demanded. He became a king of a hidden, borderless kingdom made of concrete, steel, and billions of dollars in silent art. Yves Bouvier's kingdom of freeports was built on a simple premise: total discretion. But here's the problem with a system built on secrecy. It's the perfect environment for a predator. This is where the Freeport king met the oligarch. Dmitry Rybolovlev, a Russian billionaire, needed a place to park his fortune, and fast. Art, an unregulated asset class, was the perfect vehicle. And because of the 1917 law's legacy, the art world operated under a critical exemption from the Bank Secrecy Act until 2021. Dealers like Bouvier were not required to perform the same anti-money laundering checks as a Swiss bank. This legal vacuum allowed Bouvier to act as both dealer and advisor to Rybolovlev. The oligarch believed Bouvier was his agent, finding masterpieces and taking a standard 2% commission. But that wasn't the deal at all. In reality, Bouvier was buying paintings himself and then immediately reselling them to his own client, Rybolovlev, at staggering markups. A Da Vinci bought for $83 million was sold to Rybolovlev moments later for $127 million. This happened again and again. The deception was only possible because of the system's inherent opacity. Transactions happened inside the freeports, with no public records. Values were subjective. Ownership was obscured. Bouvier was simply using the tools of the modern art market, tools forged to maximize tax advantages and privacy, for his own strategic gain. Then, it all fell apart. Rybolovlev saw a news article detailing the original sale price of a Modigliani he had purchased, and the billion-dollar markup scheme was exposed. The result was a declaration of war, a sprawling, international legal battle that ripped the curtain off the art market's inner workings. The very secrecy that made art a desirable asset for Rybolovlev was turned against him. This wasn't just a feud between two powerful men, it was the inevitable consequence of a market designed to operate in the dark. So, here we are. We started with a line of text in the Revenue Act of 1917, a well-intentioned law designed to encourage philanthropy. That law transformed art into a financial tool. That tool demanded secrecy, which gave rise to the freeports. And that secrecy fueled a shadow market, where billionaires wage war over billion-dollar markups. But one question remains. Why hasn't this bubble burst? In any other market, stocks, real estate, crypto speculative manias eventually collapse under their own weight. Prices get too high, buyers get scared, and the whole thing comes crashing down. So what is the hidden force that keeps the art market perpetually inflated? The answer lies back where we started, with the tax code itself. The loophole didn't just create a way to reduce your tax bill, it created a government-subsidized exit strategy. It's the art market's secret engine of inflation. Here's how it works. If you buy a stock for $1 million and it crashes to zero, you've lost $1 million. But if you buy a painting for $1 million and its fair market value is later appraised at $10 million, you have an option no stock investor gets. You can donate that painting to a museum, and when you do, you get a tax deduction for the asterisk full $10 million. The government effectively guarantees your investment at its highest, most speculative valuation. This is the ultimate backstop. It reduces the risk for collectors at the highest end of the market. They can afford to bid astronomical prices at auction, knowing that if the market turns, they have an escape hatch subsidized by the taxpayer. This creates a price floor that never drops. It's a perpetual motion machine for art inflation. And who was the master of this move? The architect himself, Andrew Mellon, when he donated his vast collection to create the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. He wasn't just being a philanthropist, he was using the very system he helped put in place, securing his legacy and a massive tax benefit in one calculated maneuver. So that billion-dollar ghost we saw at the start, now we know what it is. It's the financial logic of a century-old tax law, still haunting every auction, whispering in every freeport, and ensuring that the price of art only ever goes up. The modern art market wasn't an accident, it was engineered. If you found this eye-opening, hit subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden causes, and leave a comment. What's the most surprising part of how the art market really works?